Welcome to That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast.
I'm Matthew Basile, a.k.a. The Conjuring Pen, your co-host.
And I am your other co-host, Captain Nostalgia.
So to this episode, we're going to look at a movie called A Score to Settle.
I have so many thoughts about this movie.
Oh, yeah, I couldn't wait to do this episode because I'm going to tell you. You know me, I am very forgiving with my reviews of movies. I'm a writer myself. I understand, the writing process, the creative process of storytelling. To use a baseball analogy, I see it as, hey, you get up to bat. Not everyone's, going to hit the ball and connect, but, you give it your try. But if you're getting up to bat and you're just swinging wildly or you just hit the ball and run to third base, I'm going to get on you about that. And that's what this movie did.
So I've had the opportunity to see Pig, which is his latest movie. You have not yet.
I have not, no.
And this movie thematically is a less superior version of Pig. So go check out the episode we did previous to this where Mike and I reviewed and talked about Pig. But this movie just seems like it has two competing visions that are going for it. And then at the end they're like, hey, you remember that movie The Sixth Sense where the guy was dead the whole time? Well, spoiler alert, we're going to do that here. And then you kind of like wedge that like Shyamalan twist in there, and I'm just like, what did I just watch?
Yeah, this movie was like, again, to use another analogy, it was like a car that's just jerking because it's not turning over properly and the gears are grinding, and that's what it felt like watching this movie. It felt like it wanted to be, like you said, a heartfelt drama about like redemption, an action revenge thriller, and then an M. Night Shyamalan movie, and it just could not decide which one it wanted to be at any given time.
So now that I've effectively spoiled a part of the ending for you guys, before the spoiler alert, this movie is now streaming on Hoopla and Hulu as of this recording. Basically, A Score to Settle. Nicolas Cage plays a guy who was like, would you say like a mobster? Is that like an accurate description of him? Because it's never actually like explicitly said.
This is again the whole thing. I told you I'm not going to be nice about this movie. This is the whole thing with this movie. Like he's involved in some kind of criminal enterprise, but we never get any kind of background. It's just random people who seem to be hanging out in alleyways doing illicit things. It's not sure whether it's an Italian mafia, whether it's just a crime syndicate, whether it's just a gang of thugs. It just never. It seems like all of those above at any given point.
So he plays a guy that gets out of prison after 19 years, and he's given this pardon to leave prison because he's got some fatal disease that they are super vague about literally the entire time. And anytime that something weird in the movie happens, they're just like, it was the disease. Yeah. So that happens, and he's basically going through and trying to like kill and knock off all of the people that wronged him and placed him in prison, all while it trying to be this like reconnection to his son. And I'm just gonna get into this because I feel like you can't talk about this movie in depth without the spoiler warning. So now that you guys have heard the synopsis, and let's get into this. So this movie, like you said, like Matt, like this movie is just it. I feel like vague is such a profound way to describe this movie.
Yeah, I mean, first off, you were actually being nice about the setup for the movie because not only is he released from prison, supposedly he agreed to go to prison to take the rep for his boss, but in exchange for a large sum of money and taking care of his son, which doesn't really make sense as to why he then, is so upset. I mean, the whole thing with his son, if we take it as he's not a ghost and it really is his son, just doesn't makes sense because it's so vague about how they even meet up. They meet up on the road as he gets out of prison. They go to this hotel that he took his son's mother to, when they were dating. They have this kind of machoistic male fantasy of father-son bonding where they're picking up women, they're eating lavish steak, and they're driving fast sports cars. And it's just, but you're like, well, wait a minute. Like, if you agreed, to go away, like, why do you feel like this guilt? Like, why do you feel this need for vengeance if you agreed to it in the first place?
Yeah. So this is my issue with this movie. Can we jump into the ghost aspect of this movie?
Yeah,
so
that's really the only way this makes any kind of semblance of sense.
So all right, so in like the last bit of the movie, like there is a scene where Nicolas Cage's character Frank goes to a graveyard and he's looking at the grave and talking to his ex-wife who is now passed on, and then it's revealed that his son is also passed on, and has this like Joker-esque montage where like you're going back and seeing frames in the movie that are previously scenes with him and his son, and you're like, okay, so clearly this is a father that is grieving. This changes the story dynamic, but it comes way too late in the film. Like, way too freaking late. And it took me until the ending to kind of figure out what was going on in the beginning of the movie. Because even the prologue and the way that it ends don't make any real sense, so to say.
Yeah, I mean, that graveyard scene, don't get me wrong. I mean, and this is what was so frustrating about this movie, because you saw certain, like you said, it didn't seem to understand what it wanted to be, but there were certain parts of the movie where you saw where it might want to try to be this, and you're like, oh, this could be really good. And then it just kind of flubs it. The graveyard scene to me was a poignant scene. I mean, it was a poignant scene of him kind of in grief. But it just comes out of nowhere because he literally is mourning his wife, and he looks to the other side of the gravestone of his wife and sees his son's gravestone. And then his son just appears in front of him, and there's no like shock revelation like in The Sixth Sense. Again, spoiler alert if you haven't seen The Sixth Sense. But when Bruce Willis realizes he's dead and a ghost, he at least kind of goes through a shock of a shock to the system. Nicolas Cage just acts like this is his reality the entire time, so you don't know whether he even knew that his son wasn't really there in these past scenes that they flash back to, or whether he was delusional because of the disease that got him out of prison. And if he was aware that his son was not dead, or he thought his son was not dead, why does he want vengeance so much? Because he got the money and his son's still alive, or because his son's a drug addict? And then if he knew his son is dead, what was that all about? Like, we were in the hotel scene. It's just so confusing that you spend the whole rest of that movie trying to piece things together.
See, so I actually didn't have that experience where I was utterly confused. It just, by the time that you actually got to that, and I will give the film credit where credit is due, that twist of his son being dead the entire time, it got me. It actually took me for a loop. I didn't see it coming, and it was probably one of the better things that I can say about this movie. However, I also have to say that I just, I don't know, it didn't take away anything from the movie for me, but also at the same time, it really kind of frustrated me to where it's all right, they did this almost 20-year plot twist that we've seen done to death 1,000 times over the last 2 decades, and here, his character's never really given anything except that he's a recovering addict and that he's his son. That's the only 2 things that we ever know. about him. And so I don't know, like it was kind of like interesting the way that they did it, but it's also very frustrating the way that they handled it. Like I almost wanted them to, like you had said, like his introduction is like he's going down the highway and his son just magically happens to be there. Like I would have preferred them to be like, to kind of have it to be where, like, instead of the prologue of like, oh yeah, like this is his son's, like, you know, death sequence or whatever, like Frank is going to jail for this, whatever that the prologue was, what we needed to do was we needed to have it be like Frank ending up in like the doctor's office being the prologue, and then like getting out and then kind of like discovering and learning that his son has been dead and kind of like going after the people that killed his son. Like had the film taken that approach to the whole aspect of it, and like we knew that like his son was dead and he's going to see ghosts because of it, like I would have been on board with that. I would have 100% been down for that. But this film just, it's messy and it's so cliche in all of the worst ways possible.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if they had avoided that twist and been up front that the son was dead and that was, you know, and he was coming to him as a ghost, it would have worked a lot better. It would have made more sense up front about the vengeance, because you see, to my problem was that if you take to the fact that this is a surprise twist at the end that the son's dead, then the son's alive and he's spending time with him that he gave up, you know, for his boss for whatever reason. I don't know why he would do that, but he gave up his life with his son. He made his son fatherless basically for, you know, 15 years or whatever. And then he spends time with his son. He's trying to reclaim that, because that's the whole reason they're in the hotel. He keeps saying, I want to make up for lost time. I want to make up for lost time. But then he keeps going and playing Punisher over here with these former associates of his and moonlighting with that. And when the son's telling him, don't do it, I'm going to leave if you do this. So it's kind of like, well, you're being contradictory, because if you're trying to really make up for lost time with your son, why are you punishing these people just because of they let your son become a drug addict who claims he's clean now? It would have made more sense to divulge what happened to the son really at the beginning, and then that's why he's going for this vengeance streak, and then his son kind of plays the better part of his consciousness, which is what they kind of were doing, but they were trying to present as the son was alive. It just, again, to go back to the baseball analogy, they hit the ball and then ran to third base. I don't, you know, I mean, that's not, I don't know what they were trying to do two different things at once.
Well, to your point, the reason that he was going after them for vengeance was because, you know, basically like he was told like, hey, like you had said, like if you go to jail, like your son will be taken care of. Okay, cool, that's fine. But they ultimately end up, the people that were supposed to be taking care of him actually ended up killing him. So that's the reason why he wanted to go out for vengeance. And this film, as a, I feel like we've been 13 minutes into this.
But if he wanted to go out for vengeance, then he would have had to know the son was dead. If he thought the son was still alive, what was his point for vengeance? That's my argument to it. That's why I think I agree with you. They should have been upfront about the son being dead from the beginning. It would have made more sense for the character's motivation.
I would argue that Frank as a character knew his mission, but us as the audience, we were left blind until that twist.
Okay, so you're interpreting it that he knew that his son was dead and that he was delusionally seeing him.
Yes. Because
I mean, if you go with that, it makes a little more sense. But that's not made clear, at least in my opinion, in the film. That's open to interpretation.
They do mention in like the film's like second act, it's like the second appearance of, or like mention of, the disease outside of.
I love the quotation marks. Very appropriate there.
I mean, this is an audio podcast, so they can't see that. But yes, I made quotations when I said the word disease. But for that one particularly, like it's the second time that it's actually mentioned, and he is basically like it flashes back to the doctor. Is like, yeah, you know, you should probably take these pills because delusions are going to be a part of what you experience. And so like that's kind of like I was like, okay, so like his son's been dead, and so I interpret it as not only is it a manifestation of grief because I know people that are very close to me that have lost people close to them, and a part of their grieving process has been to experience visions of those loved ones getting lost, and that's a part of their grieving process, kind of, getting back to a sound mind, so to say.
And I agree with that. I mean, I've talked to people I've lost, still to this day, so I do agree with that, that is, that's why I agree with you that I think if they were upfront that someone was dead, and I guess maybe they were trying to be subtle with it, but then it becomes more of a story of grief, and it's a little more makes sense.
Well, before we get into some of the other elements, there's 2 fun facts that I came across that I wanted to share with you. Would you want to guess that this movie was originally not called A Score to Settle?
Oh, what was it called?
What is the name that Nicolas Cage is nicknamed all throughout this movie?
His name's Frank. I forget the nickname that they gave him.
Old Man. This movie was originally entitled Old Man.
Oh, that's right. He's called Old Man all the time.
Many times.
That's right. You're right.
And also, okay, if you ever question why we do a Nicolas Cage podcast, it is for reasons like what I'm about to say. There's a scene in this movie where Nicolas Cage, it's probably one of my favorite scenes in this movie, where Nicolas Cage is literally just playing the piano and singing. He learned how to play piano for that one scene.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I had it on my list too, and I was just about to say the same thing. This is why I always argue I love Nicolas Cage, and he deserves to be honored, because this movie is not Oscar-worthy by any stretch. No. Okay, we're trying to give it the benefit of the doubt here by talking about grief and delusions and the grief process. But this actor Nicolas Cage learned how to play the piano this scene is probably like 2 minutes, if that.
So I would say that the actual musical portion of the scene is maybe a minute 15.
Yeah, so and he learned to play piano just for those 2 minutes, just to add that reality, just to add that method acting. And that's that's why I love Nicolas Cage. That's why I respect him as an actor. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I was blown away when I learned that. I was like, yeah. Dang. All right. And so I don't know about you two, but I wrote in my notes when I was watching this, I was like, why do I need a Nicolas Cage musical after this movie?
Because if he learned to play the piano, he needs to put it to better use than this movie. That's why. because Nicolas Cage musical would be amazing.
Well, think about it.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Think about it. That's the only type of genre film that he hasn't done.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. He's pretty much done every single one but a musical. So if you're Nicolas Cage, if you're listening, and if any agents or musical directors are listening, you got to cast Nicolas Cage in a musical. That's what his fans deserve to see. I also had here as a trivia too, although not as good as the piano one. I had that actually. The movie starts off with a young flashback sequence where and it was actually played by Nicolas Cage's nephew, which is why it looked so much like Nicolas Cage in that original scene, which I also thought was an extra stretch. I'm sure Nicolas Cage probably had something to do with that as well, and that's just an extra stretch to the authenticity that this man brings to every film he works on, even if the film itself and the script is very subpar like this one is.
I love how you say it's so authoritative. I probably said that wrong, but I love how you said that with such authority. Absolutely 100% agree. Then this is the second film that we've covered that he's actually been on screen or someone in his family has played a direct tie to him. The first one being Arsenal, where his brother actually and him shared a scene together. And but let's jump into some of the crime elements of this movie because so this movie, for the large part of it, I think we can safely agree, like, it's two-sided. On the flip side, you have all of, like, a grieving parent kind of, coming to grips finally with his son being dead, and kind of, also simultaneously being in the real world, but also facing death himself. So he's kind of going through this myriad of just, like, grief. And then on the flip side, you have this, like, revenge thriller, which this is where it's really started to lose me. Like, I was all for, like, the father-son dynamic, but once it starts to get into him going to hunt for, like, Dragon and Tank and the original guy, like the boss man, like, I was just like, man, like, this just feels so, like, cliche and forgettable. Like why are we getting into this right now? If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, it was like multiple movies here, and it shifted to like a Punisher, Man on Fire movie several times, where he's basically going after these guys. He's trying to track them down. And again, it's not, to me, maybe I just wasn't paying attention enough, but it wasn't really even made clear as to who he's trying to track down. It seems like he wants to just annihilate the entire crew because they betrayed him. Because again, they let his son die or become a drug addict, depending on, I guess, what interpretation you want to go with. And he thinks the boss, I think, is dead. I think he thinks the boss is alive. Then he thinks the boss is dead. Then he finds out the boss is alive. I'm not even sure where that. Maybe you were able to follow that.
Yeah. So he goes originally to go see the guy, like, directly. Like, that's the first thing he goes to see, and then he ends up actually, like, finding that, like, it's his daughter that now runs this empire. And so he's like, all right, so this guy died about 7-8 years ago, and then he goes to visit Dragon, and Dragon's like, no, he's still alive, like. And then they go to Tank, and Tank tells him that he's in a nursing home. So that's how that, like, chain of events happen.
And then I guess, which I guess confused me, is he, I guess, thinks he's still running the crew from the nursing home.
Yeah, so he faked his death
until he gets to the actual nursing home, which isn't until almost the very end when he sees that the boss is actually comatose.
Yes.
Is that how that followed? Okay.
Yes. And then the Benjamin Bratt character ends up actually, like, being revealed to be the boss man.
Right, which I couldn't understand. Again, I mean, please explain this to me, because maybe, like I said, I just was dense with this particular movie. But Q, who's Benjamin Bratt's character, is part of the crew, but the only one that Nicolas Cage isn't really going after. And I couldn't figure out why they were buddy and why Nicolas Cage wasn't seeking vengeance on Q as well. Even though at the end, of course, it turns out that Q was running the crew when the boss man actually went into the coma, just using him as a front, and Q was the one who ordered the execution of Nicolas Cage's son. But I don't understand why Nicolas Cage didn't even try to at least, blow his brains out, just for being part of the crew like he was doing with everybody else, because that's literally what he does to the other two guys.
So I'm pretty sure that it actually takes him actually seeing the boss like comatose, like you were saying, to actually realize like what's been happening and kind of like how like Q basically has been like toying with his emotions. And the way that they conversate in the bars, particularly when he's like my little girl's 3 days away from getting married, and the way that they talk about each other though is that he even says right before Frank shoots him that they were close, like that, Joseph was like a son to him. So like I think that like out of everybody, like the two of them were like thick as thieves, like they were brothers. That's how I kind of read their relationship, that like the other guys involved with Dragon and Tank, like they just happened to work there, but like Frank and Q were like actually like tight.
Gotcha. Okay, so that I felt that the syndicate or mob crew or whatever was going on here was very vague. So thank you for explaining the hierarchy a little bit better and how this was broken down and how they operated. I also got to say, I don't know if we want to jump right into this. This movie's climax takes place, as you just mentioned, at Q's daughter's wedding in like the back of the church, basically, where Nicolas Cage, having realized that Q was the one who executed his son, who, by the way, I don't know if this affected you, but even Q didn't almost come across. If you're going to do a kind of revenge thriller, I feel like the guy that you get revenge on at the end, should be really evil, really evil, SOB. But it doesn't even come across that way. And I don't know if they were trying to go for something a little higher minded, but because it's revealed at the end. First off, he's like I said, he's giving away his daughter in matrimony. It's at his daughter's wedding. He basically pleads when Nicolas Cage shows up and, basically takes the bride hostage to get the Q. Basically pleads, just, this is between us. If you want to shoot me for what I did to your son, go ahead, just let her go, which is kind of like an honorable thing. And he explains to Nicolas Cage, he's like, look, I don't want to do this, but your son was a drug addict who was threatening to turn us all in if we didn't give him money or something like that, I think, So he kind of like could be in the criminal world understandable for what he did, because, he was trying to obviously save the entire operation. So it's not even, and then at the end, Nicolas Cage, spoiler alert, doesn't kill Q. He just walks out after having, of course, a Nicolas Cage freak out, which was great, but his classic Nicolas Cage freak out. He walks out, and then the daughter shoots him in the shoulder, which I love that scene because it's basically like, to me, it summed up the entire movie, because he's walking out after basically letting Q off the hook. He's bloody and going to die anyway. She shoots him in the shoulder. He like jerks from it, looks back at her with the gun, and then just continues walking just because he's like, screw it.
So you would classify the church scene as the climax and not the shootout at the nursing home?
Yeah, I would. Personally.
Okay, so like, also when they so like there's a scene like right before the like the series of events that take place with Q and Frank right before, and there's a scene where he's going to the nursing home, and she's like, so the nurse, one of the nurses like is taking Frank to Big Boss, whose name I can't remember. But yeah. You got a name for me?
No, I don't think I wrote down the name for that.
So he goes, and so he finds out he's comatose, and basically what ends up happening is, still like he basically still like goes through, takes the plan, like beats the crap out of him, and then goes back to like hang out. And the nurse basically reveals that it's Dragon that's been the one that's been like coming to like visit him, and then they have this like giant shootout, and Dragon felt like the most like cliche forced part of this whole movie. Like, I know we've complained a lot about how vague and like just like copycat this movie feels, but when you think of just like 90s and like 80s like gangster movies, like this guy is just like a satire of them turned into a parody and then pooped on. Like it's so bad, man. Like that scene in particular, it's just like I was like, why are we doing this? Like why are we here right now?
Well, and Dragon, when he first shows up on screen, aside from the flashback sequence, Nicolas Cage, his character Frank, the old man, finds him in like, I guess a whorehouse, and it makes a misogynistic comment like "leave bitches," like right after being a romantic gentleman to another woman, and because he's getting sexual favors by these prostitutes, and he puts his robe back on and he talks about how big his genitalia is, and he has these tattoos, and it's just so, like you said, just such a cliche intro, and he just stays that cliche all the way through. There's no depth to that character. You do, at least the other thug guy that Nicolas Cage tracks down, Tank, they have this whole conversation, about how, Tank did him wrong and how he's tried to, live with his mistakes, and, how there's a little bit of depth to that character, when Nicolas Cage finds him. Dragon, he's just a thug that just gets shot up.
Which is saying something, because Tank is in this movie considerably less than Dragon, but like you said, like Tank leaves an impression. Like Tank is a guy that like I left that scene, and it's maybe like a 6-minute scene. I left that scene literally emotional, because like I have been through situations where like I've had to be that person where I'm like, man, like I value you as a friend, and like I'm completely ready to just, if we need to like not be friends anymore, like you want to just give up this relationship, like I'm more than happy to get there, man. Like I seriously wronged you and I'm so sorry. Like I've had to be that guy, and be that takes a lot of maturity. That takes a lot of, being secure in who you are, and also like owning up to your mistakes. And I think that his scene in particular, like really made that film feel really, really good. Like it helped bring. It was one of the more memorable scenes in the movie, and it's something that like really related to me on a personal level. Yeah,
it was. It wasn't a very emotional scene, and I did have a reaction to it, and I think that's what frustrated me so much about this movie, because they did have scenes like that, few and far between, but they did have some scenes like that. And that's the thing, like you have this very poignant scene where, Frank's there to kill him. I mean, just get revenge. And there's this meaningful conversation. I almost found myself wondering if Frank was even going to go through with killing him. But you then have that poignant scene that really takes a hard look at, owning your mistakes, owning your life. And then you follow it up with Dragon over here, talking about his junk, and and making misogynistic comments, and he seems like he belongs in a completely different movie. These two guys, and it just underscores how the bad parts even more, because you see some good in the movie. You see some real poignancy.
Well, it's a great juxtaposition to have those two characters, right? Because here you have the example of, like, this is what Frank could have been had he stayed in the game, but here you also have a different version of, like, this is what Frank could have been had he gotten out, and, like, actually kind of, like, felt the weight and the conviction of the things that he did. And that's one of the things that have always interested me about either people that have done these these gangster, drug stuff, prostitution stuff in real life, and also, or even in these movies, like, do they feel the weight of what they've done? And if so, like, what does that reconciliation journey look like for them? And that's such a powerful character moment. And we haven't had a whole lot of notable celebrities on any of Victims and Villains. Very minorly, one of the ones that we were able to get a couple years ago happened to be XXX Church. And if you guys know anything about XXX Church, is that XXX Church is basically a Christian organization that exists, that goes into pornography conventions and industries and basically works with them to kind of educate people on like relationships between like pornography, how that affects your sexual health, how it affects your marital health, how it affects your life, and how it's also tied to like human trafficking and like all this other stuff. But at the same time, one of the people that run it now actually used to be an ex-porn star, and like she tells her story about like what life was like being a porn star, and how like getting out of that lifestyle has really like that journey of reconciliation is just powerfully beautiful and so profound. And stories like that, and character journeys like that, and even personal journeys, I think are such fascinating stories to be told, seen, or heard.
Well, and maybe we going back to the film too. I mean, maybe this is again what the movie was trying to show was, that Frank kind of had several choices to make in his life. He made obviously some mistakes early on, as we see in the flashback scene, and perhaps, which I don't think was very well put together, but what they were maybe trying to do to give him the benefit of the doubt is to show that, he could have been like Tank and really taken responsibility for the mistakes he did and not put the blame on, the other gang members, and not sought vengeance, and kind of reconciled what happened with his son as his own mistake, really, and because he left him fatherless. Or, he could be like Dragon and just basically, be callous and not take any stock in his actions and just, go about being the reckless man. And I think throughout the movie, Frank kind of vacillates between those two, which is, I guess, the poignancy of it. I just don't think that they really kind of made that clear and kind of resolved that well enough at the end.
Well, let's back that up, like to where you were talking about specifically about Frank, kind of maybe feeling a little bit of guilt. If you were in Frank's shoes, and you had done life, business, family matters with these people, wouldn't you trust them? Yeah,
which is what he claims in the movie. He claims that he trusted them to take care of his son, that this was how it was done, that this is this was his family. I think he even uses that term, which, is used a lot in mob movies, obviously Italian mob movies and everything like that, that there's this, loyalty to this body of people that no matter what they do, what, situations, you're going to, get that there's that pack mentality, so to speak. But, it's never, in those movies, though, a lot of times it causes trouble because those people get blindsided, by the greed and ambition and the camaraderie, and they kind of lose themselves, and they don't do what's best for them. They do what's, best for the group, which doesn't always line up, which I think is what happened with Frank.
Well, that kind of goes back to that old adage of it's, you always want to, first off, I want to back up. You talked about family and how they're woven through so tightly in mafia movies. Are you insinuating that Fast and Furious are a series of mafia movies?
I would put it in a mob movie, maybe not Italian, but I would put it in a mob movie, yes, setting. Yeah, I think, that was exactly the point. I mean, they later in their series, we're going to start talking about Fast Furious, so there's nothing to do with Nicolas Cage, but later in their series, they started becoming government espionage. I'm going to use quotes as well for those of you who can't see me, government espionage agents, but they started off as criminals. And they were loyal to the family. That was the whole deal. Paul Walker became more loyal to Dom than he did to the institution of society because as a police officer.
So, yeah. So I digress with Fast and Furious because
I've seen every single one except for the most recent, so I could talk Fast and Furious all night if you wanted to.
What a mess that new one is. Anyways, with this one,
I avoided it. That's why I haven't seen it because I knew it was going to be a mess.
With this one in particularly, though, Frank, I think is sometimes, and that's one of the things that I've personally had to learn too, is that a few years ago I had a mentor, and I've always been kind of you always want to provide for your family, that mentality, and it's really easy to get wrapped up into that mentality and actually forget who you're doing it for. And so to some degree, I think that that's kind of what Frank experiences. And so Frank gets kind of wrapped up in this journey of, I'm doing this for my family. And so it's really easy to justify all of the things that you do. But in the same time, with that same approach, you also end up actually starting to take away from your family and actually start to just make it really bad. And what I mean by that is your justification, the very thing that you're trying to provide your family for, is elevated to something that's actually taking you away from it. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, and I can speak from personal experience. I don't have the same situation that I can recall with you said with friendship, but I can speak to personal experience where you are caught up with a group of people and you feel that camaraderie, and it's not really healthy relationships that you have with these people, but you feel a sense of loyalty because it's just kind of been drilled into your head that, hey, we're a family, we're gonna have each other's back, we're there for each other. But when those relationships truly are there to support you, in whatever you do, then that's one thing. But when those relationships become toxic, when they become very self-serving, to certain individuals, and disregarding who you are and what you are. The family, that was great that Frank had that loyalty to the family, but he also had a biological family that, he needed to take care of. And in the end, there's no substitute for, him being a father to his own son. And so that was, I think Frank's sin or mistake, if you will, was that he, had this misplaced loyalty to this family that really didn't care about him and didn't care about his son. They really just, and he says that, I think, at the end when he finds the boss in the coma, he says, I don't know if you would have kept up the bargain that we made, but I'm going to I think something along the lines that he's going to assume he would, or he's going to believe he would. And he kind of lets him off the hook and says goodbye to him, basically saying that it wasn't his fault what happened to his son, but he would have assumed if he had not fallen into the coma that maybe he would have taken care of the son and would have held up his bargain to the family. And maybe that was true, maybe that wasn't. But obviously, the rest of the family members that Frank was a part of, didn't uphold the bargain. They didn't keep Frank's interest in mind. They kept their own interest in mind. Even when his son, was threatening them, then they said the hell with it, and they killed him.
Yeah, there's one scene in particular too that to kind of go back to and to kind of change courses a little bit. There's a scene in particular where we've talked about it a few times where he is the ghost twist has been revealed, and he basically comes down to his father's level as his dad Frank is kind of just grieving over Joey. And he says, remember what they say about revenge. You have to dig two graves, one for you and one for the other person, because ultimately in the end, vengeance doesn't help anybody. You could take a life and you're never going to feel better. And I think to kind of draw in another pop culture figure, there's a great scene in Batman Forever where Bruce is talking to Dick, and he says, if you take this guy's life who took your parents' life, it's not going to bring your parents back. It's just going to bring upon emptiness to you. And then you're going to continue searching for something to fill that hole. And I think that for Frank being up against the clock, racing for on his life for one, and also two, being on this really deadly journey of vengeance, that I think that sometimes we get so wrapped up in the past and get so caught up in our own stuff that we actually fail to kind of see people as we, for lack of a better word, we forget, we don't know how to forgive and forget. And a portion of that forgiveness is going to better your own mental health and better your own just life in general moving into that. And I think that that's kind of the point that we need to understand and really grasp coming into that. Especially because you see that in the end, that is kind of almost a foreshadowing of what's going to happen to Frank, because Frank might not be dead by the time the credits roll, but he's damn near pretty close.
He is. And I agree with you. I mean, I have always felt that Batman Forever, I love that you cited that, because actually that was, one of my favorite Batman movies because of that theme that they put in there, even though, some other stuff wasn't necessarily to my liking. But I really love that theme, and that's, what I always drew me to the Batman character was that, he walks that line of justice and vengeance, and vengeance will eat away at your soul. It's that anger, that resentment, that eventually can fester to hatred. It eats away at you. It takes up your life. And it doesn't solve anything, and it actually further damages. It causes whoever did you wrong. If you're seeking vengeance, they will wrong you again if you get that vengeance, because it will just take more of you. It will take more. It will keep you in that moment, and it will eat up your life, and it will take away the joy that you can really get from this life if you can heal and go the other route. And that's really. Again, like I said, there were some great themes to this movie, which is what made it so frustrating. And I think there was this one scene where the son, before he's revealed as, dead, is arguing, with Frank about this and saying, in the hotel even, where he's also saying that the vengeance, it's not going to do anything. I'm here now with you. Let's enjoy our time together. The vengeance won't change anything. And I think that's a poignant scene, because it's true, because Frank can get vengeance. It's not going to bring his son back. If his son was there with him, really, or is there with him in spirit, however you want to interpret that, it's better for him to be with his son and reestablish that relationship than it is for him to spill blood to try to make himself feel better, or try to get some kind of semblance of justice.
Also, even taking vengeance completely out of the equation, he does, like you said, like he's like, I'm here now. And how many times do we, because of our own ambitions, do we actually get wrapped up in our own agendas and fail to kind of be there for the people that need us? Like, there are several times, like early in my own marriage, where like I just had singular vision where like this is stuff that like I have to do today, and never really took into consideration of like, how can I serve my wife? Like how can I be a good husband today? Like, is there laundry that needs to be done? Like, does the trash need to be taken out? Do the dishes need to be put away? Does the cat boxes need to be done? Like, does laundry need to be done? There's so many different things that I could have done, but I had this habit of just like being so singular minded focused, and like taking that time for granted to be like, no, I'm just going to sit here and watch a lot of television and just be selfish with it. And, I think that a large portion of that is like Frank is missing out on just precious time. Like, here you have a guy that spent 19 years in jail for something that we're led to believe he didn't even do. And now he has the one thing that he's been wanting for nearly 2 decades and doesn't want it. Like, that, just let go of your ambitions and embrace those around you and learn to just be open more. Because I think that sometimes we end up finding out that we're more depressed because we're in those ambitious cycles of mental health, and we can't see the forest for the trees and realize that like there are people around us that actually care about us and love us and want the best for us.
Yeah, well put. We do. We get caught up in our own, like you said, ambitions, and I think that's what happened in this movie. And like I said, had they kind of more polished that and focused on it, I think this movie would have really been something that would have been very profound and very meaningful, because it with this whole crime thing, I mean, that's a little bit far-fetched, I think, for many of our listeners out there, and hopefully are not involved in crime syndicates. But we do run into situations where, we have misplaced loyalties, we have certain ambitions, we have, something else that we're looking to do, and we lose sight of what's really important, and that's the connections we make in this world, the meaningful connections. The connection Frank had with his son was what he lost sight of. He lost sight of that, and that was probably the one thing that he should have valued the most.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And one of the other things that I really pulled from this is there's a scene in particular where Frank is taking his medicine for his very mysterious disease, and he basically like hides the fact from his son. And here you have this like, and it's after this like montage of like them like going out and like doing father-son activities, and it's this very touching, very heartfelt sequence of events that just transpires. And I looked at this and I'm like, man, like we do the same exact thing when it comes to mental health. Is like we want to really portray this like flashy, like I'm okay, like I am just living in the moment mentality and persona, but then we don't want to be vulnerable and tell others what's really going on in our lives. And I mean, yes, like ghost twist aside, like I just want to talk about this thing for a second, because like, had Frank kind of been more open and upfront about like, hey, like the real reason that I got let out of the clink was because of, look at me, the office is rubbing off on me. The real reason that I got let out is because I have this disease. And just being upfront about it. And I think that, we all get sick. We all deal with mental health, so it's like, why try to hide this fact? Because like, just because it's uncomfortable to talk about, man, seize that awkward moment and have real conversations, because in the end it might actually end up saving someone's life.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be upfront. I can tell, again, not to go into my personal experiences too in depth, but I did, I saw that flat out. When when you're dealing with mental health, especially when you're dealing with like trauma from your past that's, causing that, it's your inner child asking for help, and your inner child is going to continually ask for help. And the more you push that inner child away, the more you push those problems away, the more you push the demons away, whatever analogy or metaphor you want to use, the bill will come due eventually, and it will become due even steeper than, the more time you push it away. And I've seen it happen, and it can get pretty severe. So, and I think that's, again, you could try to graft that onto, what this movie was, that, Frank was pushing away his problems, pushing away his guilt, his fears, his, regrets, his, mental issues. He was his disease. Again, I'm going to use quotes here for disease. And, he was pushing that all away. And, it finally kind of came due in that church, and like you said, he I don't know if he was dead at the end when the credits rolled, but he wasn't going to last much past the credits. That's for sure. And he probably paid the ultimate price.
Yes, 100%. And so, I think in the end, like it's there's a couple things that we learned from A Score to Settle is, be vulnerable, like dare to be bold enough to like be transparent, because in the end it could end up saving the relationships. And like there's, even to go back to the final finale, so to say, between him and Q, like it's like Q is basically just trying to get him to kind of put it behind him, because he values their friendship and like actually wants to like see Frank succeed and for Frank to be healthy. And he understands that like this place of vengeance that Frank is at like isn't healthy for him, and he wants the best for his friend. And I think that's an admirable quality. Be bold enough to kind of, again, to call out your friends and your loved ones and say, hey, like I don't think you're doing well, like let's talk about it. And we see in the end, like, Frank's ending is actually a cautionary ending, because he wanted things that just eventually just weren't healthy for him on a mental space.
Yeah, I think that was exactly, what the ending was trying to say. I think story-wise, I think there were a lot of other parts they had kind of thrown at us throughout the movie that diluted that ending, but that message, I think, was what they were trying to go for, and I think it's a very poignant message. And again, that's why I was so disappointed in this movie, because, like I said, I do think the thesis of the film was very worthwhile, but they kind of shoehorned this very profound, deep examination of a man kind of at the end of his life, of filled with regret and guilt and mistakes, and they shoehorned it into this kind of paint by numbers action revenge thriller / ghost movie, Field of Dreams, Sixth Sense thing, and it got muddled. But I do think that's a worthwhile message, and at least if you watch this movie, I hope those people take that message to heart.
Well, I think we've already answered this question, but is A Score to Settle worthy of high praise?
My take, like I said, no. I think, like I said, it had some admirable intentions, but it just was kind of half-cocked between something profound and kind of your standard action flick, and it never kind of really got off the ground to get high praise.
I'm also in that same camp. I think this movie is not worthy of high praise. I think it is one of the weaker films we've seen on here. I won't say it's as bad as Arsenal, because there are some there definitely are some things that I did appreciate about this movie. There are, like I said, like the dynamic between him and his son Joseph. I really enjoyed all of their scenes. Even kind of him being like the voice of reason, like I thought was something that was very much welcome into this thing. And so, but you have that father-son dynamic competing with this vigilante vengeance that Matt talked about, and it just ends up making the film like very convoluted and just over the top weird. So go ahead.
We're talking about the good parts, I think, mostly here. We're pulling out the good parts to give Nick Cage the benefit. Where there's a lot of scenes that are real, like we didn't even talk about the whole prostitute pimp thing, which ran. I couldn't figure out for whatever reason throughout the film, and just proved to be a distraction, in my opinion. So I just want to let the listeners out there know that because we've talked about a lot of poignant stuff, but there was a lot of stuff we left out. So
yeah, it's weird, but whatever. So
that's why we're not giving it high praise, even though we talked about a lot of great themes in there.
that poor bellboy.
Oh my God, yeah, jeez. I don't know why he stayed as long as he did. I would have gotten out of there as soon as the gun showed up. I'm out.
This is a gunfight. Okay, well, we'll see myself out.
Right, it's not worth the money to get shot.
So it is unanimous, and Score to Settle is not worthy of high praise, but something that might be worthy of high praise is where you guys can find Mr. Matthew Basile on social media.
Yes, if you search for The Conjuring Pen, include the Conjuring Pen, I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And you can also read my blog at human1nature.blogspot.com.
You guys can find me. I am on Letterboxd. I am at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can go to find our parent company, Victims and Villains, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch. And you guys, if you guys would like to help us get mental health resources into schools and conventions, you guys can go support us on Patreon and also Ko-fi now as well. Just Patreon and Ko-fi respectively.com/victims and villains, all of which you guys can find in the show notes below. You guys can also go to also at the same time, you guys can also go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys can find all of the information that I've just talked about, more episodes like this and other podcasts. Also, as well, find movie reviews and, most importantly, mental health resource library. So until next time, keep on caging, y'all.